Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Wijaya. It is a very great opportunity to welcome you this morning. I would like to say thank you for joining us today in this international online seminar about our accounting academics culturally intelligent. This seminar is held by BINUS University Master of Accounting, BINUS University Undergraduate Accounting Study Program in collaboration with RMIT University. First of all, I would like to welcome Dr. Meredith Tharapos, CA, CPA, as our speaker today. Dr. Meredith Tharapos, as Deputy Head of Department Accounting, Undergraduate Program Manager, and Senior Lecturer at School of Accounting, Information System, and Supply Chain College of Business, RMIT University. And I also want to extend our welcome to Bu Rindang Widuri as Head of Magister Accounting, BINUS Graduate Program. Also, I would like to welcome all of the staff and students from BINUS University and also other university and institutions who joined with us this morning. Regarding Zoom security issues, I would like to inform you that we use a licensed Zoom and we enable waiting room and filter out participants and audience who joined in this event. And make sure you install Zoom through the official website. Before we start the seminar, please take a moment to look at our rules during seminars in your screen. And as a reminder for all staff and students from BINUS University, please write the name in the specified format. BINUS_student ID or employee ID or lecturer ID _name. And from other institution, please write the name in the specified format. Institution _name. At this time, I would like to welcome Ibu Rindang Widuri as the Head of Magister Accounting BINUS Graduate Program. Please welcome Bu Rindang Widuri.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, respected guests and participants. My name is Rindang Widuri, as a Head of Master of Accounting Bina Nusantara University, or BINUS University, and it is my privilege and pleasure on behalf of our university to welcome you here today. The participants for this seminars are academics, students, and practitioners from various regions in Indonesia. And we are delighted to have you with us to participate in our international seminar titled Art Accounting Academics Culturally Intelligence. Thank you for coming. And also we are honored to have Dr. Meredith Tharapos with us today. Well, she has more than 20 years teaching experience in universities within Melbourne and with RMIT's international partners in Asia as well. Her research background is focusing on behavioral issues in the field of accounting, educational, cultural, and accountability. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Meredith. And today, Meredith will present her research result on how academics deal with culturally diverse students and their colleagues. And before I hand over to Jonathan, our MC for today, I also would like to express my sincere appreciation to the committee who generously helped us to make this seminar come together and to become a success, for sure. And accounting lab team, Agustinus Winoto, Jonathan and Archie, corporate marketing communication and international office team. Well, we couldn't have done it this seminar without you. And once again, welcome to all participants. Enjoy the seminar and prepare yourself to be challenged, excited, and inspired. Thank you very much. So, Jonathan.
Thank you, Bu Rindang, for the opening. Moving right along, it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Bu Heni Kurniawati, SST, AK, MSc. Let me introduce a brief highlight about Bu Heni Kurniawati. Bu Heni Kurniawati obtained her diploma degree from Sekolah Tinggi Akuntansi Negara, her master degree from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, US, and her PhD at Ghent University, Belgium. She is a lecturer at the Department of Accounting and Finance of Bina Nusantara, where she teaches corporate reporting, auditing, corporate governance, and research method in bachelor and master degree. Her research focuses on the role of auditing and corporate reporting within the context of emerging market, especially Indonesia. She has several awards, LPDP awardee for doctoral degree program 2014 until 2018. Best paper on International Conference on Accounting and Finance, Yogyakarta 2018, for foreign ownership and board membership from developed versus emerging countries and auditor choice, evidence of Indonesia. Please welcome Bu Hendy Kurniawati.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Dear students and colleagues, I guess from all over Indonesia, yeah. Let me once again welcome you to this international webinar titled "Accounting Are Accounting Academics Culturally Intelligent?" Very interesting topic. I hope you all healthy and safe. My name is Hendy Kurniawati, as Jonathan introduced me, an accounting lecturer of BINUS University, and today I will be your guide in this webinar. First of all, I am also delighted to see all of you here, eager to engage in the interesting discussion about cultural intelligence. Although have been decreasing significantly due to COVID-19 pandemic, cross-culture mobility and internationalization are increasing in this borderless world. The confrontation of different culture may have positive effect on richness and perspective and tolerance. However, it is also potential for conflicts. Today, we are pleased that we have Dr. Meredith Tharapos from RMIT University that will share with us the topic. Dr. Tharapos is a senior lecturer and the undergraduate program manager in the Department of Accounting at RMIT University. She has over 20 years experience teaching in university within Melbourne and with RMIT's international partner in Asia. Dr. Tharapos' research is broadly concerned with behavioral issues within the field of accounting and includes educational culture and accountability aspects. Using cultural intelligence as the informing theoretical framework, her research examines the factors that affect the development of CQ levels of accounting academics. The result of this study has been published in the British Accounting Review. Dr. Tharapos' student-centered teaching approach, underpinned by her research surrounding cultural intelligence, is based around the generation of supportive and inclusive learning environment. She is passionate about creating transformative and authentic educational experiences for her accounting students. She had the honor of receiving a number of Teaching Excellence Awards. Also, she is an active and passionate member of accounting education communities. Also serve to drive and enhance the impact in accounting education research and innovation in the Asian Pacific regions that include convener of the annual RMIT Accounting Educators Conference, committee member of the Accounting and Finance Association of Australia and New Zealand, Accounting Education Special Interest Group. Prior to joining academia, she gained experience in the accounting professions, for example, the ASX, and undertook volunteer work at not-profit organization in Papua New Guinea and China. Dr. Tharapos will be sharing with us her article in what determines CQ in accounting academics, why is it important, and what are the implications of the result. Before beginning the presentation of Dr. Tharapos, I would like to remind you that the presentation, the phase of the seminar will be divided into three parts. The first part is presentation, and then the second part is session questions and answers. You will, the participants can ask the question through chat box or by raising their hands. I will help to manage the questions and answer sessions. And the third one is the conclusion, and we will close the meeting. So without further delay, let's give our full attention to Dr. Tharapos. Dr. Tharapos, the time and space are yours.
Thank you very much, Henny. And I'm just checking that everybody can hear me okay.
Yes, we hear you clearly.
So thank you for the very, very kind invitation to present in your seminars. I'm very honored, and for me personally, it's lovely to see Rin Dang again. She was at RMIT University for a period of time, and during that time, I very much enjoyed her company. So, as you mentioned in your introduction, Henny, the world is very much a global space, and here we are connecting up across countries virtually. So even though international travel has been largely ground to a big halt because of COVID, but we've just found other ways to connect with each other than in a face-to-face environment. And whilst we may not be traveling, the whole issue of cultural intelligence becomes incredibly important because we are connecting remotely, largely through the use of technology at the moment. And of course, as you know, different cultures have different ways of doing things. So whilst we may not be meeting face to face, the whole issue and surrounding conversation about the importance of cultural intelligence is just as important, if not more so, because we often don't have a lot of the visual clues that we would normally use when we're communicating with each other. Right, so thank you once again for your very, very kind invitation. Welcome to all the participants. I look forward to chatting with you after the presentation, hearing your questions, comments, and anything else that you may have to say. So I'll just share my screen now. So I think I'm hoping that you can see my title slide. Is that correct? And oh, share. Okay, so I'm just checking, Henny, can you see my title slide now? Great. Thank you
clearly.
Great, thank you very much. And greetings from RMIT Australia in Melbourne. Now, Melbourne is currently in the middle of winter, so it's about 14 degrees here, so quite cold. I'm not a winter person, so I'd very much like to be where you guys are, in much, much warmer climates, but nonetheless. The other thing going on in Melbourne at the moment, in the state of Victoria, we've had a recent increase in the number of COVID cases. So as of midnight tonight, we're all going back into lockdown for a period of 6 weeks. Oh. So it's kind of a little bit crazy here in Melbourne at the moment with everybody preparing to go back into lockdown. So a little bit of Meredith. Yes, and of course we're preparing for teaching online for our students during second semester. We will not be teaching face to face at all during second semester. So a little bit of little bit of context about what's going on at RMIT and in Melbourne. I got my email address there, so if any of you would like to correspond with me after the seminar, by all means take a note of my email address. I'd love to hear from you, any comments that you may have, the research that you're doing. It would be wonderful to keep the communication going after the seminar. Okay, so as I mentioned, you know, the whole issue of globalization has not stopped just because of COVID. And in a way, COVID just illustrates how global we are, how interconnected we are, and how much more complex the world has become. And as a result of globalization, you have got quite a large impact on businesses, multinational corporations, and of course, educational institutions are not immune from that. I've got some figures there about the contribution of international education to various economies, the UK, the US, and Australia. Those numbers will have jumped around a little bit as a result of COVID, but nonetheless, education is a significant revenue stream for host nations, in particular the US, the UK, and Australia. And as a result, what we find in our classrooms in Australia is that we have a very multicultural mix within the classrooms, which is fabulous. I personally love it. And as a result, universities are, you may find this surprising, but they're one of the world's most culturally diverse organizations. And when I reflect on the level of cultural diversity amongst the students in my classroom, they come in Australia. We have students from primarily Asia. So lots of students from China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, right throughout the Asian nations in particular, as well as students from Europe, the UK, and the US. Also think about it, and on staff at RMIT, our colleagues come from a number of different countries, which I'll show you in a moment. And then as academics, we all know if we want to get research grants and publications in high-level accounting and finance journals, it's advisable to work with international research teams. So we find that a lot of our research is undertaken with colleagues that don't even reside in Australia. They come from different countries. And as a result, we've probably met them at various conferences. And we've just had the major Australian-New Zealand conference over the weekend. So it commenced on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. It just concluded last night. Conducted in virtual format. And there were 650 attendees, which was just extraordinary, given that we suddenly moved to an online and a virtual format for the conference. So it gives you some idea of what we're working with in our roles as academics now. It is quite diverse. And, you know, here I am presenting my research to a totally different cultural group other than just Australia. So it's fabulous. I think the virtual use of technology has opened up a whole lot of avenues for communication. This gives you some idea of where my colleagues at RMIT in Melbourne, the country in which they've originated from. So you can see that we've got colleagues from Indonesia, Pakistan, Thailand, India, Bangladesh, China, and then, you know, moving beyond the Asian nations. And there's more than just one colleague from many of those countries, let me tell you. And moving beyond Asia, you know, Africa, we've got a colleague from Kenya, several from Italy, the UK, Russia, and of course our closest, one of our closest neighbours in terms of Melbourne, New Zealand. So many, many different cultures, even within my team, in terms of the course that I coordinate, and then I'm also deputy head of department. So in terms of the colleagues within that department, and so that affects, you know, different ways of doing things, different perspectives, different expectations, all of which can be very, very diverse depending on the culture that those colleagues have come from. Just to give you some numbers around international students in Australia, so huge increase in the 2000s. So from 2001 through to 2012, we've had a 500% increase in the number of international students who are undertaking an accounting undergraduate degree at an Australian university. So that gives you some idea of the level of cultural diversity amongst our student base and amongst the colleagues that I work with at RMIT. Now, all of that can create a really, really rich environment to work within. So in terms of the depth of experience, what students bring to the classroom, you know, when you're having a discussion around something like ethics. Ethics means different things often in different cultures. And so the richness that students can bring to that conversation can be amazing. Also, when we consider the implementation of international financial reporting standards, what works in one particular country may not work in others when we try and juxtapose that to another culture. Even translating words into other cultures, you know, what does probable, how do you translate the word probable? Or true and fair in other languages? They have different meanings, and depending on the particular word selected in another language, can give quite a different interpretation to the financial accounting standard, other than what was intended by the standard setters. So all of this can lead to fantastic conversations during class, but it can create conflict, it can marginalize students, and it can create all sorts of challenges, because each of those students, given that they've come from different cultural backgrounds, will have had slightly different pedagogical methodologies in their secondary school education. Some will have had quite a didactic method of delivery, in that the teacher just tells them what they need to know, they memorize it and give it back in an exam situation. Increasingly, I know at RMIT, we're shifting away from a heavy reliance on exams and towards what we call more authentic assessment. Assessment that mirrors the tasks that students will ultimately do once they enter the work environment. So the assessment is very much designed around the use of spreadsheets, around the use of technology, serious games, in order to drive home concepts, working in teams, all those sorts of things. So completely different methods of assessment. Role expectations is another one. And students from some cultures may come into the classroom expecting the teacher to be a moral guide, and expecting them to assist them substantially with what they need to know. This might be quite different to what the academic expects, in that the students, there may be the expectation that students be self-directed learners, and therefore they're the ones that need to go off and create and combine their own knowledge. And so this is where we can have a conflict of expectations. You know, what's the student's responsibilities and what are the expectations of the academic? Different language standards is another one. Whilst the medium of instruction may be English, different students can have different levels of English standards. And whilst I can speak a little bit of Mandarin and Greek, I could not undertake academic study in either of those languages. Yes, I may be able to comprehend the conversation, albeit a little bit after everybody else. I'd be a little bit behind the conversation, but no way would I be able to write, and certainly not write to an academic standard in either of those languages. So you can see there's all sorts of nuances that can impact what's going on in the classroom, along with assumed prior knowledge and capabilities. So what we're finding, what's been reported in the literature, is that academics are increasingly required to possess cross-cultural skills. And some academics can move quite comfortably across the cultural boundaries that are existing in the classroom and have no problems at all dealing with the different cultures and actually seem to enjoy it. I'm one of those, but this stems from I lived in China for 3 years, and as a result learnt the language there, and that enabled me to understand particularly students from Confucian heritage cultures, the impacts of that type of surrounding on the way that they think and their beliefs, and therefore the implications for their behaviour in the classroom. And given that that's predominantly where most of our students in Australia come from, it was actually a really, really useful time. I also spent some time in Papua New Guinea, in Ringgane. So again, completely different culture. And whilst I grew up in Australia, I'm married to someone from Greek heritage. So again, different culture. So I'm someone who really enjoys interacting with people from other cultures. Other people struggle with those sorts of complexities and find it incredibly difficult. And you can see the picture here on the slide. Now, these are the Indigenous people of Australia, Aborigines, and they existed in Australia before it was settled by the white people. And here we've got an explorer, Captain Cook, arriving, and they're telling him that he needs to behave like them. Now you can see the complete differences in the way that they're dressed. Captain Cook is not well attired for the climate in Australia at all, and you can see the issues associated with cultural diversity. Now, what's come through in the literature as quite an important factor is what's called cultural intelligence. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is. Now, it's relatively new in that it was conceptualized by Ili and Ung in 2003. And you may have of IQ, so general intelligence. You may also have heard of emotional intelligence, or EQ, social intelligence, practical intelligence. So cultural intelligence fits in with all of those, what we call the multiple loci of intelligence theory. And cultural intelligence is defined as the capability of an individual to function effectively in situations characterized by cultural diversity. So in effect, it's a little bit like emotional intelligence, except that you've got the culturally diverse situation overlaying that. So in a way, it picks up where emotional intelligence leaves off and extends that to culturally diverse situations. It comprises 4 interrelated components, and I'll talk about these in a moment, but they're metacognitive CQ, cognitive CQ, motivational CQ, and behavioral CQ. It also has a measurement instrument associated with it. It's 20 items, and it's called the Cultural Intelligence Scale. CQS is the way it's abbreviated in the literature. And that was developed and validated by Ung et al. In 2007. So here's our 4 CQ components. Now, metacognitive CQ is quite simply making sense of culturally diverse situations. But at a deeper level than that, it involves analyzing one's own thought patterns and processes to understand and solve problems when faced with a different cultural situation. So it involves thinking a little bit in advance about, you know, strategies that you might put together for a forthcoming culturally diverse situation, monitoring it in real time and then reflecting afterwards about what might need to be changed. We've got cognitive CQ, which is knowledge of cultural norms, systems and values and conventions that different societies have, along with their differences. And they have been usually acquired through education and personal experiences. And often when you go to, you know, do some training around cultural diversity, it might center around knowledge of different systems and values and their differences. So focusing largely on cognitive CQ. And this is where CQ moves completely, that is part of it, but it's also got, well, how do we take that knowledge and use it to create strategies in advance of a cultural situation? It also encompasses our motivation. So our level, so motivational CQ refers to an individual's level of interest, drive, energy to function and interact effectively in culturally diverse situations, and to persevere through the inevitable challenges and conflicts. They're going to happen. What's the person's level of motivation to keep going? So it looks at intrinsic, extrinsic motivation levels. And then all of that will influence how we behave in the culturally diverse setting. So behavioral CQ refers to an individual's ability to enact a wide range of behaviors when dealing with people from different cultures. It doesn't mean just to mimic them. Sometimes that would be inappropriate. So it involves knowing when, how to adapt to the different cultural situations. It includes verbal behavior, so things like accent, tone, expressiveness. It includes non-verbal behavior, so things like body language, gestures, facial expressions. And it also involves what the literature refers to as speech acts, so the exact words and phrases used. So for instance, when I'm teaching my international students in Singapore, whilst the language of instruction in Singaporean schools is English, they often refer to their level of English as Singlish, a combination of you know, Singaporean dialect and English. And it's really important that we slow down our rate of speech, that we take time, we pause in between, just to allow them to catch up in their thinking. I've done some focus groups with the students there, and they're incredibly insightful in what they told me. But that gives you an overview of the CQ model. And all four components are of equal importance and they're interrelated. Okay, so no one component is more important than the other. And you can see the way that, you know, you need the cognitive knowledge in order to know how to adjust your behavior. You need the cognitive knowledge in order to design your appropriate strategies. And of course, you need to be motivated. So they're all interrelated, and no one component is of greater significance. They're all of equal weighting. So I've got a quote by the chairman of PwC there. Cultural intelligence is a critical capability for navigating today's increasingly global and diverse business environment. And they regard it as so important that they've actually made it one of their core behaviours at PwC. So it demonstrates, you know, just how important, once you see the Big Four getting on board with this as they work with global clients, and across their global offices. I mentioned that CQ has a measurement instrument attached to it. It has 20 items, and so 4 of those items relate to metacognitive CQ, 6 relate to cognitive CQ, and 5 items relate each to motivational CQ and behavioral CQ. And I've got some sample items there from each of the 4 components. So for metacognitive CQ, one of the items is I am conscious of the cultural knowledge I use when interacting with people with different cultural backgrounds. Cognitive CQ, I know the legal and economic systems of other cultures. Motivational CQ, I enjoy interacting with people from different cultures. And behavioral CQ, I change my verbal behavior, accent, tone, when a cross-cultural interaction requires it. Now, the instrument has a 7-point Likert scale, ranging from 1, strongly disagree, up to 7, which is strongly agree. In terms of the research in this space, cultural intelligence has been looked at in relation to emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and they have found to be related. The cultural intelligence has been found to be related but distinct from those different types of intelligence. So hence it fits within that multiple loci of intelligence. Researchers have examined the outcomes, and there are a number of cognitive, psychological, behavioral outcomes that are related to cultural intelligence. So things like global leadership performance, the level of cultural adjustment by expats in particular. Other researchers have looked at the antecedents, or things that might lead to higher levels of cultural intelligence. So things like personality traits, international work experience, international non-work experience, studying cross-cultural programs and intercultural contact. Now, the area that this project focused on, the bulk of the work that has been done around antecedents is to do with international work experience. But the findings have not been consistent across studies. And the measures used to capture international experience have largely been confined, up to our study, largely been confined to the number of international experiences, or some attempt to capture the length of short-term international experience. Hence, we've got these mixed findings in the results from these studies. So that's the research to date. And then, and hence the motivation for our study. What we wanted to do was examine the levels of cultural intelligence amongst Australian accounting academics, believe it or not. Australia is quite a unique nation in that it doesn't share a geographical border. We're an island nation. So we don't share borders. We thought it would be a really unique country to examine this. And what we wanted to look at, well, what were the demographic and other factors that might explain differences amongst the levels of IQ in academics. We also wanted to drill down deeper into international experience and examine that in terms of cultural distance and diversity of experience. So what did we do? Well, why did we select academic accountants? As I mentioned at the start, the accounting discipline has been significantly impacted by the increasing number of international students, and accounting has traditionally been at the forefront of a lot of transnational teaching. So I myself have taught for partnership universities in Jakarta, as well as Singapore with RMIT. And other colleagues have taught in Hong Kong or Malaysia as well. So a significant part of our role involves not only dealing with our international classrooms domestically, but we also go to very, very different cultures and teach transnationally. And whilst we used accounting academics, of course, what our findings have relevance beyond Australia and beyond just accounting, because these sorts of issues are not unique by any means to accounting or to Australia. So what did we do? We sent a survey to all, and we distributed it online to all full-time accounting academics listed on Australian university websites. So there were 39 universities, and we had a population size of 771 full-time academics at the time of conducting the survey. We excluded adjunct professors, emeritus professors, research fellows, sessional staff, doctoral students. In terms of sessional staff, they often teach for more than one university, so that could have potentially muddied our results. We wanted people who were in the classroom, so for that reason we eliminated research fellows or adjunct or emeritus professors. We received some auto replies from 19 academics indicated that they were on extended leave and wouldn't be across their emails. So we discarded them. So the usable population size for the survey was 745. We did get 253 completed responses. So a 34% response rate, which for academics is pretty good. We were quite happy with that response rate. What we did was firstly calculate the CQS scores on average for accounting academics, and then we compared that to the results of other studies. So here's how our accounting academics, Australian accounting academics did. There's their total CQ down the bottom there, an average of.
Lowest was cognitive CQ, which is a bit of a worry when so much of the other components kind of hinge off what actually is known by the accounting academic. But there's the minimum and maximum. So how did this compare to the results from other studies? Well, here's Australian accounting academics down here. So table arranged in terms of total CQ from highest to lowest. Now, we deliberately selected a wide range of cohorts, and our selected studies had all used the full 20-item CQS, and they had published the mean and standard deviation for all components. Some of the studies just use an abridged version of the questionnaire, and not all studies publish the mean and standard deviation. So that's how we came up with our comparative studies here. And in terms of the professional cohorts, you can see that Australia is not doing so well. You know, sitting below Australia, we've got the labourers, the Philippine labourers working in Taiwan, and we've got the Turkish military personnel, and then we've got a lot of student groups sitting down here underneath Australian accounting academics. So compared to other professional cohorts like international school leavers, expats working in Malaysia, or multicultural team members across various countries, Koreans, expated overseas, international managers, we're looking about average, so not that great. remember, the other research question that we wanted to explore was the effect of international experience, given that it's been an area that has been looked at in the literature, but with varying results. So what we asked participants was to indicate whether they had taught transnationally and in what countries. So then when we created our model, we created a variable for teaching in Southeast Asia. We created a variable for teaching in other English-speaking countries. We created a variable for teaching in Europe. Interestingly enough, the model that had teaching in Southeast Asia was the only one where that variable was significant. So teaching in Southeast Asia for Australian accounting academics provided consistently positive, statistically significant relationships with total CQ and all 4 CQ components. Whereas teaching in other English-speaking countries such as New Zealand, Canada, US, UK was not significant, nor was teaching in Europe. The other variable that was significant was people who had resided overseas, which we defined as a continuous period for greater than 12 months. It was those groups who had higher levels of CQ. So what this gave us was a greater understanding of international experience, in that if we think about the region of Southeast Asia, it is very, very culturally different. And if we look at Hofstede, the culture of Australia and the culture of Southeast Asia, according to Hofstede, are at opposite ends of the spectrum. And so, you know, they're culturally distant. So it was this aspect that led to higher levels of CQ, along with immersing oneself and living overseas for a period longer than 12 months. So our contribution to CQ literature, it increases our study, the results of our study, increases our understanding of the antecedents that influence CQ levels in terms of international experience. And it is possible that due to Australia's geographical isolation, that you know, many respondents had not travelled or rarely travelled internationally. Interesting observation. And it was through the examination of the potential impact of overseas teaching experiences and overseas residency. Those sorts of things had not been examined in the literature before. And as a result, our study introduced new measures that captured the breadth and the depth of international experience in terms of long-term overseas residency and cultural distance in terms of the international experience. The good news through all of that is that CQ levels can be improved. They are malleable, and CQ can be developed over time through intercultural experiences, travel, appropriate training. So each of us can increase our own CQ levels. And I'm now in the process of doing a further qualitative study that looks at using a number of different qualitative methods, so interviews, focus groups, observation. I worked with participants teaching internationally in Singapore and Hong Kong, and observed them teaching compared to how they teach in Australia. And I also did focus groups with their students. So that really enabled me to look at the process of what happens during an international teaching experience and how that impacts on the development of their cultural intelligence levels. So that's the paper that I'm currently working on, and I hope to have that published, as well as a number of other little studies from this same bigger study that I undertook. But I've put the, and I will provide the slides and to the organisers of the seminar, and they will distribute accordingly. So what I've done is popped in the link to our paper in the British Accounting Review. So my co-authors are Brendan O'Connell, who was Rindang's PhD supervisor, along with mine, and Stephen Delaportis, and Ilias Basadozis. So he is from Aston University in the UK. So it was quite, and that goes back to my point about international collaborations that I made earlier. So thank you very much for the honour of presenting my research at your seminar. And again, I popped up my email address if you've got any queries, questions that you're not able to ask at the end of the seminar now, then you've got another avenue that I'm only too happy. But I know Henny is going to moderate the questions, and we'll see how we go. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and then I'll be able to see the chat box coming up on the side. And over to you, Henny. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Very interesting topic. By the way, it's a small word, yeah. Your co-author, Dr. Ilias Basadozis, is also my external examiner back then in PhD.
Yes, it is a small world, isn't it? And you must have done your PhD around audit, or I'm guessing
Yeah.
that's one of his areas of expertise. But he visit before COVID. He would visit RMIT University
Oh, yeah.
once a year and give seminars, and of course that's how you hook up with projects and collaborators. But small world indeed, Henny.
Yeah, very interesting topic also from the participants. We know now what is cultural intelligence and how it is important to our world now. And there are 4 components of cultural intelligence, and it is equally component, yeah, Meredith. Not one's more than the other, and also interrelated.
Correct.
While we're waiting for the participants to have questions, we will have maybe 3 sessions, 1 session for 3 questions. Okay, the first one, I will. Okay, we have a questions from Ibu Miranti. She asks about, would you please to explain or inform us any do's and don'ts for conducting international research collaborations?
And I would always encourage people to engage in international research teams. I think it significantly enhances your chances of publication and your ability to collect data across different countries just increases. And I think in putting together your research teams, always think about, you want to get a team together. You don't want everyone who's got the same skills. That would be useless. You know, you might have someone who's fantastic with statistics, and so if you're doing quantitative research, survey-based, you need that person to work with your statistics and slice and dice them different ways, so that you know, eventually draw out the story that you want to tell. But you also need somebody who's very skilled at story writing, and so can wrap the story around the statistics and position it very, very nicely for an international journal and an international readership. And then you need all the other people to review and make comments and give feedback on the paper. So I have, and sometimes, and you need people that work in terms of your approach to the project the same as you do. So it's no use having people that are motivated. You'll get frustrated. If you're a highly motivated person, you'll get frustrated by someone who's not so motivated. And if you're a lot more casual in your approach, you'll get frustrated by working with somebody who's very pedantic and focused. So you need to think about it, you know, what skills does the person have that's bringing to the project? And also, what are their ways of working? Do you enjoy connecting with this person and working with this person? It's a bit like our student groups. When they work in teams in the classroom, and you see all of those same kind of conversations going on within the teams. Why is this exactly the same with selecting our research partners? And often if you've got a really good research group, you tend to stay with them across different projects as well.
Can you maybe share your tips when you work in the research group with culturally diverse? Like we have a conflict related to culture. How you handle it?
Yes, and Henny, that's a very good question, because none of my PhD students were born in Australia. I have a PhD student who is Filipino but working in Vietnam. I have an Indian student, and I have a Vietnamese student. So all very, very different cultures. I think it's important to have that conversation up front about the roles and expectations. Yeah. And my co-author was Brandon O'Connell, and he was my supervisor, so I'm well aware of the way he works. He was also Rindang's supervisor, but we co-supervise a number of HDR students now. And one of the first questions we have with them is, what do you expect us to be doing as your supervisors? What would you like us to do? What are your expectations around us as supervisors? And then we also have the same conversation with the student. Here are our expectations about what we expect you to be doing between meetings, and, you know, supplying a draft, you know, 3 days before the meeting because we need time to read it. So it's very, very important in that very, very first meeting or two, kind of establish ways of working that work for both cultures. And it can be like even simple things like family commitments can impact on the way a student can work, as well as culture, as well as, you know, other expectations within the family group or their own personal situation. So it's always critical that all those things are kind of freely discussed, and if any of that changes or is not working, then that the students know that they're free to say, can we do this another way? And you just have that frank and open conversation. It is a little bit more difficult where in a PhD relationship where the student is perhaps feels a bit inhibited, and particularly from some cultures, this may be very difficult to kind of speak up with a supervisor who is seen as, you know, someone much more senior than them. But I think I work quite hard to develop that relationship with the student and just check in with them to see how they're doing, which is very different to checking up. Checking in just means, how are you going? You know, can we support you in any other ways? Is this way of working helping you to work efficiently, or is it providing stress? How would you like to do things differently? So I think it's just maintaining open communication, which can be difficult to work with in some cultures, but it's critical to a successful partnership.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you, Meredith. We're still waiting for the participants to ask questions. You can either type in the chat box or just raise your hand through the participants box.
Bu, can I ask questions straight away?
Yes, sure. Please, Bu Yansun.
Yeah, sorry, Dr. Meredith, it's a very interesting research actually about cultural intelligence, because this is the first time I heard about it actually. And then I'm just curious about the other variables that maybe distracted your research sometimes, like maybe about the technology updates of the people, or maybe the behavior of their age different. Is it including in the variables that already considered as the cultural intelligence?
Thank you, Jensen. And yes, we did look at age. We did look at seniority levels, so whether they were a professor, associate professor, or a lecturer. None of those variables were particularly significant. One variable that was a little bit interesting was whether the respondents were male or female. And the females were found to have statistically higher levels of behavioral CQ. And we explained this by often as females, I think we're very across relationships, you know, when you consider that our position in our families, we often females have the more nurturing roles in societies, such as nurses, those sorts of things. And so often we take notice of the way people behave. So it was a possible explanation for our results in that, but something that is worthy of further investigation. But it was interesting. And so then we delved into the literature around females being more across behavioral aspects or more attuned. And we found that that is you know, aligns with research across that sort of in the management space that has been found to be okay, which is a really interesting finding.
Yeah, because one of our struggle actually now, because we work in the education industry, but our graduates will be working in the industry and then working with multicultural people maybe. And then the biggest problem is not about only the multicultural, but in terms of behavior of millennials, they said, because the millennials' attitudes is different to the other generations, they claim. I don't know if maybe you can explain further about this behavior. Is it really influence the attitude of the millennials in terms of the working environment?
Yeah, and it was, thank you, Jensen, for your question. And it was quite interesting when we looked at age and we sliced and diced it different ways. And we did find age, whilst not significantly impacted, but it did, you know, it was an inverse relationship. The older participants had higher levels of CQ, but not significantly so. Possible explanation that we had for that is that those older participants had travelled more extensively than perhaps their younger counterparts. That certainly taught more often overseas, and they'd had the opportunity to travel, possibly because their income levels were higher than perhaps younger participants. And remember, in Australia, everywhere we go is a long way in a plane. So, it's expensive. And, you know, even Indonesia would be, Indonesia and New Zealand would be our two closest neighbours in terms of international travel, and Papua New Guinea. But Melbourne to Bali is still 5.5 hours in a plane. Melbourne to Auckland is still 4.5 hours. Like nowhere is, it's not like Europe. And I think this is where our European counterparts find us amazing when we travel for international conferences in Europe. And you mentioned that I think Henny had, when in the introduction, I noticed that she'd got her PhD from Ghent University in Belgium. And I was fortunate enough to attend an accounting education conference associated with the British Accounting Finance Association last year at Ghent University in Belgium. But for us to travel there, it was 30 hours we were in transit. And when we arrived, they find it extraordinary that we would get on a plane and attend a 3-day conference and then turn around and come back. Whereas for them, you know, international travel involves 1 or 2 hours in a plane and they're in a completely different country. So Australia is quite unique. And I think that, you know, the results from our study are quite interesting because, as I mentioned, we're just an island nation. We don't geographically border anybody else. And so it would be interesting to replicate the study in other countries, in other regions, and see how the results pan out.
Thank you so much, Meredith, for the answer.
You're welcome, Anne.
Yeah, Bu Henny, I give it to you back.
So, Henny, any other queries coming through from the audience? I noticed that in the comment box, yes, Melbourne area is in total lockdown these days. You're absolutely right. And I mentioned at the start of the presentation that the directive came down from our Premier yesterday afternoon that we go into lockdown as of midnight tonight. So it's a little crazy in Melbourne right now. And I'm scanning through.
Meredith, can I think Pak Iksan Mojo raised his hands, Pak Iksan.
Thank you, Bu. Jadi, thank you, Bu Meredith. I think it's very interesting. The thing that I want to ask you, I mean, like, your survey is about like teaching to culturally different different background students. But my question is the other way around. What if, I mean, like, for example, like us in BINUS International, yeah, we're teaching basically from the lecture coming from the Asian background, say Indonesian background, to the overseas. Many of our students are also international students.
Yes.
What do you think will happen? I mean, like, is the if the reverse happens, it's not like the students culturally coming from like background not Europeans, but what if the lectures is that the situations? I mean, like your conclusions can still be valid, or is there anything that we can adjust like to cater for that? That's my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishan. And our survey was to all accounting academics employed at Australian universities. This does not mean they were born in Australia. And as I indicated, you know, in terms of where my colleagues from RMIT come from, there's a small percentage that are actually born in Australia. And so that's the beauty of who we work with. So, yeah, remember that our sample of Australian accounting academics was accounting academics employed at an Australian university, as opposed to academics that were born in Australia. So very, very important distinction. Many of our respondents, and we, another one of the variables was whether English was the first language. And about, it was almost a half and half, where English was not their first language. So, which indicated that they were born outside, potentially born outside Australia, or exposed to another culture, particularly during their formative years, which was something that we really wanted to explore. So again, we sliced and diced the data according to whether English was their first language, but not significantly significant positive relationship there. It was more, quite surprisingly, the fact that they had taught in Southeast Asia, or that they had resided elsewhere in another country other than Australia for a continuous period longer than 12 months. So very, very good observation there in terms of the background of our respondents. And they were not all born in Australia by any stretch at all. Did that answer your question, Ishan?
Yes, Bu. Thank you. Thank you, Bu Meredith. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for asking the question. Very good point to clarify.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Lenny?
Yes, Bu Rindang, silakan.
Can I have I don't know whether maybe is it questions or comments, because I think as Meredith said in the presentation, it says that the cultural intelligence aspects, there are 4 aspects, and they are interrelated equally. But is it possible, Meredith, if there's antecedent aspects such as motivational aspects, and it I'm not sure whether you observe these situations. So the first one is the individual need to have a motivation to be exposed to the different cultures, and then when they have the interest, and it will lead the metacognitive aspects, and also the cognitive, and then behave based on the culture itself.
Yeah, thank you, Rindang. And that's where the qualitative study that I'm currently in the process of writing up comes in, because what I was able to, in interviewing, and I in the qualitative study, I had 8 participants that I worked with quite in depth, in that I followed them on their international teaching trip, basically. I was the pest in the corner. And so I interviewed them before they commenced their teaching. I observed them teaching in the classroom for their entire international teaching visit. And then I conducted post-observation interviews with them at the end of the teaching visit. And in the questions there, the questions in the interview guide were all structured around the 4 components of CQ. And there was around motivation, because I really wanted to understand their motivation. The other part of that project was that each of those participants filled out the 20-item CQS survey. So that enabled me to calculate their levels of cultural intelligence across all 4 components and compare them to the average that I had for the Australian accounting academics. That enabled me to classify each of my participants as average CQ, high CQ, or low CQ, according to how their scores panned out, in comparison to the average accounting academic. What was really interesting is that those that scored highly for motivational CQ had high levels of intrinsic motivation. In other words, they spoke of really, really enjoying travel, loved the whole cultural aspect of teaching internationally, loved teaching the international students, loved getting out and about, learning more about the culture of the host country, visited places of interest, museums, history, read about the culture. So they really immersed themselves in the culture because they really, really enjoyed it, and talked about the sheer love of travel and teaching internationally with international students. What you could see there was that intrinsic motivation. They didn't get paid any more for it than had they done the same hours domestically in Australia. It's the same in our workload model. by contrast, the person with low motivational CQ talked about the fact that he wasn't particularly motivated about teaching internationally. He just saw it as part of his job and didn't see it as part of his mission in life. I'm quoting him. Didn't see it as part of mission in life to spread the knowledge of accounting across the world. He just did it because he saw it as part of his job. So really interesting difference about the motivation for wanting to undertake in my international work experience, which I used international teaching to explore that in the qualitative study. So that came through very, very strongly. The other thing that came through very strongly in terms of the high motivational CQ people and the cognitive CQ is that while they were in the host country, they met colleagues from that country. So their local lecturers, they went out to dinner and they talked about the culture of the country and the history and the geography, and they talked about the implications that might have on classroom behaviour. So all the while you can see them building up their knowledge, which then informs the strategies that they're implementing, which is their metacognitive CQ, and then how they behave in dealing with those students. So the qualitative study really helped reinforce the interrelatedness of those 4 CQ components. But it was really interesting seeing how the participants that rated more highly in the 4 CQ components, what they did, how they did it, their thoughts, and how they interacted with students and others while they were there. So I think in some ways we found the link between international teaching experience in culturally distant countries. So then in some ways the qualitative study is a lot more insightful because it helps us understand, well, what's the process during that international teaching experience that leads to the development of higher levels of CQ. So very good question, Rindang. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. So can't wait for the publications of your qualitative study then.
Oh, it's something that takes a long time.
I know. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Meredith and Bu Henny.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Ibu Amelia. I will read it for you, Meredith. In your research, was the instruments or CQF taken straight away from Ang et al. 2007, or did you make some adjustment or modification? In relation to that, did all the previous studies that you listed in the table of CQ score use the same CQ as instruments? That's the question.
Thank you, and thank you, Amelia, for your question. Yes, it was the instrument, the 20-item instrument from Ang et al. And we did not make any adjustments or modifications. The only thing I did was scramble the order of the items, because in the instrument, they're all listed under, each of their headings, metacognitive CQ, and then you've got the cognitive CQ. So I took out the headings and scrambled the order because I didn't want participants to kind of get survey fatigue or lead them to giving answers that would bias the results one way or another. So that was the only thing I did, remove headings, scramble order of items. And yes, those comparative studies listed in the paper, they were selected because they had all used that same 20-item CQS instrument and had published the means and standard deviations. Some studies modify that instrument and reduce the number of items in that they only takes, 2 or 3 items from each component. But each of the comparative studies had to use the full 20-item instrument. Amelia, so thank you for your question.
Thank you, Meredith. While waiting for another question, I have a question. That's interesting for me that your result show that traveling to Southeast Asia have significant result compared to other. Is it because Australia has the some closeness culture to another country, for example, UK or other Western countries, or can you also consider another that has a distance relation with Australia, for example, another countries that are not Southeast Asia? Is it the same result in it?
Yes, so we asked participants because the instrument that we used had two sections. So section 1 was all the background data and section 2 was the 20-item instrument. One of the questions that we asked was, had they taught in, and we listed the 4 most common countries for Australian coming academics to teach, and that would be Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and China, and then we had other, and then we had place specified. So they had specified the country. So then when we were doing our coding, we coded Southeast Asia, so Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, China into one variable. We coded what we called Anglophone countries, so English-speaking countries, UK, US, Canada, New Zealand. We put them into one basket. And then we had Europe, because a lot of our academics, of course, have originated in Europe and have taught in other countries around Europe. So we had Europe. They were the predominant categories. Other academics, sprinkling, had taught in other regions or countries outside that, but not many, so not enough to kind of group together and have a you know, to be able to play with the statistics in a meaningful manner. So, you know, if someone were to conduct the survey amongst Indonesian accounting academics, of course, the countries that would be culturally distant to Indonesia would be quite different, and you probably get quite different groupings. But I think the takeaway from our findings was that teaching in a culturally distant country was positively significant on impacting CQ levels. And it doesn't matter what that country is in relation to, you know, where the academic is based. The fact that it was culturally distant was the most important factor, rather than the location of the country as such. So, you know, if you were doing it, you know, what would be a culture that is culturally distant to Indonesia, for example, rather than, you know, and you could compare that in a model with, say, teaching in another country that has some similarities to Indonesia, and you probably find very, very similar finding that it's the cultural distance in that international experience that leads to higher CQ levels, I'm guessing.
And then when you have a variable that traveling or stay at another country is also significantly affect the CQ levels. What is the difference between staying to another country to like teaching in Australia but in international class?
Okay, so the international teaching experience was a short-term one. Mm-hmm. Okay, so short-term intensive teaching. The overseas residency we defined as for a continuous period greater than 12 months. You can see there are two quite different time frames there. One, you know, what we wanted to see was, even though the participants, the respondents, are just going to another country to teach for short, intensive time periods, is that going to have an effect on their CQ compared to that deeper immersion? And surprisingly, both were significantly yeah, related to higher levels of CQ. Yes. And again, overseas residency, we sliced and diced according to country. It didn't make any difference. The fact that they had lived overseas for a period. And we defined it because, you know, otherwise it can be, you know, in terms of myself, I would say yes to China. And we asked them for the names of the countries and the years. If that were myself undertaking the survey, I would say yes to China because we lived there for 3 years. But in terms of Papua New Guinea, I lived and worked there for a period of 3 months. So I would not be able to select that as an option for in responding to that survey.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
About the implication, Meredith, you said in the last slide, if I'm not mistaken, that CQ is not like it is malleable, so you can train yourself because nowadays we have to move to another culture. We have to, like, this is the important skills for the students to go to the industry. How do you think that it is included in the curriculum for accounting education, or how to make them like culturally intelligent? Maybe we have to send them outside.
And that's a very good question, and that's something that we're continually exploring. And I think that's where, in the pre-COVID days, that's where the benefits of global study periods, you know, either an exchange with another university in another country, or going on an intensive study program for 2 to 3 weeks or so on. I know RMIT had one that I accompanied our students on to Bangkok, and they spent 2 weeks in Bangkok visiting local organizations, and they also attended a series of lectures at Thammasat University in Bangkok. So something like that just opens up. And so I had a face group that I created for those on the study program, and every day I would ask them questions. So I would get them to say, identify some cultural differences and similarities in what you're seeing today, and post a picture. So they would talk about, you know, the advertising that they were seeing and how that was different to the type of advertising that you see in Australia, and the type of people that were represented in that. When we went to visit organizations, I would get them to think about the managerial style. And one of the organizations that we visited was the Ford manufacturing plant just outside of Bangkok. Now, Ford was originally, well, they had a manufacturing plant in Victoria, and it was subsequently closed down and the manufacturing moved to this particular factory in Bangkok. And the manager was the same that was there in Geelong, and he had gone over to Bangkok to manage this factory. And one of the questions I got him to explain to the students was, well, how is your managerial style changed as a result of you know, the different culture? What do you have to do differently in terms of managing your employees? So talk about fascinating differences in terms of what they did on the weekend, and then how that impacted the way they came to work on Monday, and how the conversations, the difficult conversations that he had to have, how he would, you know, in Australia he could do that more directly, but in Bangkok he had to do that more indirectly. So I think, you know, this is something I discuss with my students, because, you know, when they were doing group work, and a number there, you know, there might be a student from China and Indonesia and Malaysia, and there might be a domestic Australian student in there. Different ways of working. And, you know, one group were fantastic. They said, oh, every time we met, we went to the culture, a restaurant of the culture of one of the people in the group. So I think one was Japanese, and they had a meal at a Japanese restaurant. So the Japanese.
Interesting.
I wouldn't have thought of doing that. But they said they just learned so much from that experience. So we can do it with the students in our classroom, but I think it's also a fascinating observation to sit in staff room meetings and look at the way people from different cultures react, and, how they ask questions. We've got an Italian colleague who's absolutely gorgeous, but when she asks a question, you'll get the question in this most beautiful, flowery language telling you all the ins and outs, and it's very detailed and it's absolutely gorgeous, but totally different approach to see someone from Australia who'll just go bang and ask the question straight away, or a colleague from maybe China who may not feel comfortable in asking the question in the room, but will ask it outside the room privately.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
so,
yeah.
You can even reflect on the way your colleagues work, and that gives you, you just increase your knowledge so much. And, just having lunch with colleagues from different cultures and chatting to them about what they did on the weekend, that is a really interesting conversation to open up the way different cultures spend their leisure time and what they value as important. And, where they may see family in that, or society, and how they view work. They're conversations that you can have all the time, every day, to constantly increase your knowledge. And of course, there's regional differences. It's like saying all of Australia behaves one way. It doesn't. The people from Tasmania down the bottom of Australia are very, very different to, say, the people in the Northern Territory or Western Australia. Even between Melbourne and Sydney, there's cultural differences. Melburnians are known for wearing a lot of black and being very introverted. Sydney is known for being more flamboyant and extroverted. And yet, in Sydney, and you would know from regions in Indonesia, different islands each have their own culture that are quite different to other regions. So, the more, once you get started on the journey, and this is the cultural intelligence journey, you just start learning more and more, and it influences the way that you behave and the questions you ask, and, different ways of working with different people. You will be increasing your CQ levels as you go on.
Okay. Thank you, Meredith, for the insightful experience you share with us. I think we have one more question for this meeting, still from Ibu Amelia. Yeah, the result shows that cognitive CQ has the lowest mean compared to the three remaining civic CQ components. What could be the potential reasons for these findings?
Thank you, Amelia. And again, a very good question. And we did reflect on that. Possibly it's because Australia, one of the reasons we thought was possibly because Australia is an island and doesn't share a geographical border, that we don't naturally, and everyone's far away from us, that we have to be quite active in, but we've got also a lot of cultures under our nose. So we probably have to be a lot more active in learning about other cultures. Australians usually only speak one language. We don't, when you think of people in Europe, because they border so many different countries, they automatically speak at least 3 or 4 languages. People in India know so many different dialects, and possibly people in Indonesia likewise. We tend to only know English. We're quite insular because we don't border another country. So I think that as we reflected, we think that that's possibly one of the reasons that we're geographically isolated.
Okay, questions I think is the last we have today. Let me summarize our webinar today with Dr. Meredith Tharapos. We are pleased because we now know about the cultural intelligence, how beautiful if we have culturally intelligent, so we can see another culture differently, although differently, but it is beautiful. And also the implication for our students, for our research, for our classroom. I think that's my summary about today's webinar. Thank you again, Dr. Meredith, for sharing with us your interesting research. Hopefully we can meet each other again, either in Indonesia or Australia.
That would be
And
my, yes. Go, sorry to interrupt, Henny, go ahead.
And I also thank for all the participants who join us today with this interesting discussion. Hopefully you still you can have benefit from this conversation and discussion, and stay safe and healthy.
Yes, and thank you, Henny, and thank you for, I'm honored to have presented today. Thank you for your very, very kind invitation, and for Rindang for reaching out to me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I convene the annual RMIT Accounting Educators Conference, which we would normally hold in November, but because of COVID, we're not going to physically hold the conference, but we are going to run a webinar. So once we've got the details of that, I can forward them on to Rindang for distribution. We'd love to have you join us virtually this year, and in subsequent years, we'd love you to have us join us physically at RMIT in November come 2021. But again, I'd like to echo your words, Henny. Please look after yourself and stay safe in the current environment.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Meredith and Bu Henny, for the valuable insight. I believe this presentation will help us understand the topic much better.